Hi everybody, I'm Ryan. Today we're going to finish up our constructed set review with multicolored lands and artifacts in Phyrexia All Will Be One. Generally, I don't give like a A through F or a 1 through 10 or 1 through 5 grade on these Magic cards because I think Magic is a little more complex than an actual grade like that, especially in constructed. So we're going to go through the cards that I think are going to make a splash in a constructed format, and I'm going to talk about how it's going to make that splash. So let's do it. First off, Nahiri the Unforgiving is 1 generic mana, 1 red mana, 1 white mana, and 1 Phyrexian red or white. It starts with 5 loyalty, but it has completed, where if you use the Phyrexian mana and pay life with it instead of normal mana, it'll enter with 2 less loyalty. So for example, you pay 3 mana and 2 life, it'll enter with 3 loyalty. If you pay 4 mana, it'll enter with 5 loyalty. It has 2 +1s and a 0 loyalty ability. One of its +1s is until your next turn. Up to 1 target creature attacks a player each combat if able. Its other +1 is discard a card, then draw a card. And its 0 is exile target creature or equipment card with mana value less than Nahiri's loyalty from your graveyard. Create a token that's a copy of it. That token gains haste. Exile it at the beginning of the next end step. This is a really powerful Planeswalker. I mean, the only thing that Nahiri does not have going for it is it doesn't really protect itself other than making a creature attack the player, not Nahiri. So notice it doesn't say attacks each turn if able. It says attacks a player each combat if able. So that's like a kind of cool situation with Nahiri. So it protects itself by making the homie attack you instead of it. It cycles through stuff, so it can put things in the graveyard to use its 0 ability on. So that's pretty cool. I could see this card is going to be used not in mid-range decks, is only going to be used in decks that can actually benefit from its abilities, because the cycle through, like, it doesn't make stuff, it doesn't create value besides putting things in the graveyard that you can then reanimate and get benefit from that. So things like good end of the battlefield effects and whatnot. I think this card's going to be really powerful. It's possible. I really could see Hammer Time playing this card and playing the red version. I think red has been pulling on Hammer Time for a little bit, and the set might push it over the top. We will see with Nahiri the Unforgiving. Luca Bound to Ruin is 2 generic mana, 1 red mana, 1 green mana, and 1 Phyrexian red or green. Again, has completed just like Nahiri, meaning if you use life with the Phyrexian mana, it'll enter with 2 less loyalty counters. Its +1 is add a red and a green mana. Spend this mana only to cast creature spells and activate abilities of creatures. Its -1 is create a 3/3 green Phyrexian beast token with Toxic 1. And its -4 is Luca deals X damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or planeswalkers, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control as you activate this ability. I think the issue with Luca is there's no giant payoff. Like, I could see playing this card in the same deck. You might have played like old Domri Rod. You just get value from your red and green creature deck, but that's like it. If this card is the only card that benefits from a strategy like that, and the only like kind of payoff planeswalker that can really help out your red and green creature strategy, I could see playing Luca. Otherwise, I would stray away from Luca Bound to Ruin, but it would need to exist within that Domri Rod slot. But costing 1 or possibly 2 more mana to exist in that slot is going to be pretty tough. Kaido Dancing Shadow is 2 generic mana, 1 blue, 1 black. It's a planeswalker, starts with 3 loyalty, and it has a static ability, which is kind of cool. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you may return 1 of them to its owner's hand. If you do, you may activate loyalty abilities of Kaido this turn twice rather than only once. +1 ability, speaking of those loyalty abilities, is up to 1 target creature can attack or block until your next turn. Its 0 ability is draw a card, and its -2 is create a 2/2 colorless drone artifact creature token with Death Touch. And when this creature leaves the battlefield, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. If a blue-black aggro deck ever exists, Kaido is the payoff. This card is really, really good in these aggressive decks, right? Activating these abilities twice instead of once is extremely powerful. Again, if you're attacking with blue and black creatures. Again, if there's enough blue and black aggressive creatures, especially ones with enter the battlefield effects, so you can benefit from them returning to your hand, then Kaido's going to be amazing. If that deck just doesn't exist and Kaido isn't needed as a payoff, it's probably not going to exist. It's not like the other Kaido that can really be played in just a normal mid-range strategy, because the only abilities you would use would be the 0, -2, +1 does nothing. And when a plus does literally nothing, it's really hard to justify playing it. Kaya Intangible Slayer is 3 generic mana, 2 white, 2 black. It has hexproof. Its +2 is each opponent loses 3 life, you gain 3 lives. 0 is you draw 2 cards, then each opponent may scry 1. Just kind of weird. And it's -3, exile target creature or enchantment. If it wasn't an aura, create a token that's a copy of it, except it has a 1/1 spirit creature with flying in addition to its other types. This card is going to exist in a similar context as like Teferi Hero Dominaria, only in Standard, though. This card won't touch other formats besides EDH, I don't think. In Standard, I definitely see this card existing in that like blue, white, black, you know, kind of control strategy, maybe just black-white control, and be that payoff card that, like, once you have the board stabilized, you run away with the game, similar to Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. Tyvar, Jubilant Brawler, is 1 generic mana, 1 black mana, 1 green mana. Starts with 3 loyalty. You may activate abilities of creatures you control as though those creatures had haste, +1 to untap 1 target creature, -2, mill 3 cards. You may return a creature card mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If this card can exist, where it's -2 is very, very, very good in the deck if you want to be putting a lot of creatures with mana value 2 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield, and like kind of cheat them to the battlefield in ways and make it like really, really strong, enter the battlefield effects and stuff like that. I can see Tyvar being very good, especially if they have activated abilities. Like this card is a build around. I think it's going to be a difficult build around if you build around it. But if you do, I think I can see this card being pretty powerful. Azuri Stalker of Spheres is 2 generic mana, 1 green, 1 blue. When Azuri Stalker of Spheres enters the battlefield, you may pay 3 generic mana if you do proliferate twice. Whenever you proliferate, draw a card, and it's a Phyrexian Elf Warrior, and it's a 3/3. I've talked before in my constructed set reviews about how Simic is going to be the proliferate colors, maybe even the proliferate toxic colors. And I really could see this card existing in that, especially if it's a like long-term kind of control proliferate sort of deck, because you can like kill your opponent very often playing this in late game and proliferating twice, putting stuff on planeswalkers, putting oil counters on things, whatever. Or if you have other things that this just existing where you're playing a bunch of cards that are slightly worse, but they proliferate, them drawing extra cards, like that's a really, really big deal, especially that like 2 mana blue card that you like draw a card, proliferate. So you draw a card, proliferate, draw a card off of Azuri. Like I think this might be an enabler in that deck. Glissa Sunslayer is 1 generic mana, 1 black, 1 green. It's a Phyrexian Zombie Elf 3/3, first strike, death touch, which is disgusting. First strike and death touch together because it means like it wins combats. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, choose 1. You may draw a card and lose 1 life. You may destroy target enchantment, or you remove up to 3 counters from target permanent. Card's very good. Like I think a green-black aggressive strategy, whether it's toxic or not, is really being pushed in this set. And Glissa Sunslayer is totally a payoff card from that. Like having any sort of aggressively costed card with relevant abilities, when it deals damage, you draw a card and lose a life. Like that's a type of strategy I want to be a part of, and Glissa is going to be a payoff in that green-black aggressive strategy. Malira the Living Cure, 1 green, 1 white, Human Scout 3/3. If you would get 1 or more poison counters, instead you get 1 poison counter, and you can't get additional poison counters this turn. Exile Malira the Living Cure, choose another target creature or artifact. When it's put into the graveyard this turn, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. I mean, this card's like aggressively. We've talked about like a green-white infect deck. We've talked about like a green-white aggressive deck before in my constructed set reviews of the set. Both those strategies are like really being pushed, and Malira is going to exist in the same sense. Like it being able to protect your cards is really strong. It's aggressively costed. Even if you're not an aggressive deck, I could see playing Malira in the sideboard if toxic decks become a thing and become really powerful. Similar to how like old Malira was played in sideboards for infect decks. Miglaws Maze Crusher is 1 generic mana, 1 red, 1 green, Phyrexian Beast 4/4. And is a battlefield with 5 oil counters on it. You can pay 1 and remove an oil counter. It gains Vigilance and Menace till end of turn. You can pay 2 and remove 2 oil counters. It gains +2/+2 till end of turn. And you can remove 3 oil counters and pay 3 and destroy target artifact or enchantment. This is what I'm talking about really, really push strategies. Like a red-green aggressive strategy, not necessarily toxic, is really pushed, like I've talked about, and again, in these previous constructed set reviews. If you haven't watched them, make sure you do. Miglaws is totally a payoff in that set. It's even if it didn't have any abilities, 3-mana 4/4, awesome. But it has all these abilities. It's a combat trick on a stick. It getting menace so you can push through damage. Like, all of these are extremely, extremely powerful things. Voidwing Hybrid is 1 blue, 1 black, 2/1 flyer with Toxic 1, and when you proliferate, return Voidwing Hybrid from your graveyard to your hand. If that Proliferate Infect deck ends up becoming a thing, if it's Sultai instead of Simic, it's probably going to play this card, and this card might pull it in the Sultai direction, because like I said, like it's a getting poison counters on your opponent, so these corrupted cards getting even stronger is extremely strong. Being able to do that really, really early in the game with a 2-mana 2/1 flyer, so it has evasion, and then it persists, right? It has the ability to come back from the graveyard to your hand and keep dealing damage to your opponent, even if they remove it. And if in that proliferate, like, slow roll deck that I think is going to exist in the standard format, Voidwing Hybrid is going to exist in it too. Cephalopod Sentry is 2 generic mana, 1 white, 1 blue. Phyrexian Squid, star 5. Flying, his power is equal to the number of artifacts you control. If a blue-white artifact like deck exists where you play a ton of really, really cheap artifacts, it'll probably also play Cephalopod Sentry, because a flyer that can be very, very big and a giant amount of toughness, I don't think it really matters if it's 4 mana, at least in standard. Necrogen Rot Priest is 2 generic mana, 1 black, 1 green. It's a Phyrexian Zombie Cleric, 1/5 with Toxic 2. Whenever a creature you control with Toxic deals combat damage to a player, that player gets an additional poison counter, and you can pay 1 generic, 1 black, 1 green for have target creature with Toxic gains Death Touch until end of turn. This might be one of the payoff cards and cards at the end of the curve in like a black-green aggressive Toxic deck that I talked about when I went through the black cards and the green cards in previous constructed set reviews. This could really be that payoff card. Getting an additional poison counter is just disgusting. Like, since you only need 10. But this is only if that creature-based green-black Toxic deck ends up being the Toxic deck of choice and not the Simic, maybe black as well, Proliferate deck. This card won't exist in that version of the deck. Slaughter Singer is 1 green, 1 white, 2/2 with Toxic 2. Whenever another creature you control with Toxic attacks, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Another version of this aggressive Toxic deck is a green-white Toxic deck. These are like kind of all undercosted creatures. If that deck exists, this could totally be a payoff. It being Toxic 2 because it's already really powerful. It's like a 4-power creature for 2 mana in a Toxic deck, and powering up and making it so other Toxic creatures can get through in combat is very powerful. Sword of Forge and Frontier is 3 generic mana, is an equipment, and a cryptic creature gets +2/+2 and protection from red and green, and it deals combat damage to a player. Exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn, and you may play an additional land this turn. So this is a continuation of the cycle of swords, the 2-color swords. This is finally the red and green sword. Swords really dominated standard formats when they existed before, and I think this card's very good, right? It's if it's played in that red-green aggressive deck, or really like any deck with evasion, it providing extra cards, extra ramp, is exactly what those kind of decks want to do. It's also like swords historically have been played in the sideboard in like creature mirrors or matchups to beat out cards of like removal spells. This would, for example, green or red creatures or things like that. The Filigree Xylex is 2 mana, legendary artifact. You can tap it to put an oil counter on it. You can sacrifice it to destroy each non-land permanent with mana value equal to the number of oil counters on it. Or you can tap it and remove 10 oil counters from among permanents you control and sacrifice it. It deals 10 damage to any target. We've finally received a strictly better Ratchet Bomb. This has the Ratchet Bomb stuff. It doesn't matter that it's oil counters. I guess maybe the way that it makes it not strictly better is that it's legendary, but like what are times that you've played 2 Ratchet Bombs at the same time and it's been good, right? Where if you like don't want to do the Ratchet Bomb thing, you can continue tapping it and just deal 10 damage, which probably ends the game by the time you do that. And Ratchet Bomb dominated standard formats in the past, and if you play Ratchet Bomb in internal formats, you're playing this instead. Zenith Chronicler is 2 mana, Phyrexian Construct, 3/1. Whenever a player casts their first multicolored spell each turn, each other player draws a card. If there's certain decks that are known to play a ton of multicolored spells, you probably play this card in the sideboard for them. And it'd be really funny. Soulless Jailer is a 2 mana 0/4 Phyrexian Golem. Permanent cards in graveyards can't enter the battlefield, and players can't cast non-creature spells from graveyards or exile. This is the hate card, right? It's going to be played in the sideboard for any sort of reanimator deck or any deck that is trying to cast cards from their graveyard. It's unfortunate that it's a creature and not like because creatures are easier to remove, but it's kind of a reasonable hate card. Being able to block 2 is kind of relevant. Mirrex is a land sphere. You can tap it to add a colorless mana, or tap to add 1 mana of any color, activate only if it entered the battlefield this turn, or you can pay 3 mana and tap it to create a 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature token with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block. This card is going to be played in a lot of different decks, right? I mean, even if you're not toxic, a land that creates a creature is powerful, even if it's a colorless land. So it's going to be played in that context, but most definitely be played in the like green-white toxic deck that I keep talking about. But again, doesn't necessarily need to be a toxic deck in order to play this card. Probably only in standard though, because there are better versions of these cards than in like Pioneer and Modern. Of course, we have the return of fast lands, Darkslick Source, Seachrome Coast, Copperline Gorge, Blackleaf Cliffs, and Razor Verge Thicket. We have this entering Pioneer is really relevant. I mean, we have the slow lands in Pioneer and shock lands in Pioneer. But getting the fast lands doesn't make mana insane by any means, but makes mana decisions really interesting in decks in Pioneer, and makes mana even better in Standard, which I love. And then we have the cycle of other sphere lands, the Fair Basilica, the Surgical Bay, the Dross Pit, the Autonomous Furnace, and the Hunter Maze. I think in Standard, these cards are going to be played as maybe a 1, maybe a 2 of in decks, just to be able to draw a card and continue digging, especially in mid-rangey decks that don't mind when it enters the battlefield tapped. There have a completed constructed set review for multicolored lands and artifacts, and really completed constructed set review overall on the channel. If you want to see other colors, make sure you go click on the channel as well. There's a playlist, I promise. If you like this video and want to see more stuff like it and other competitive Magic the Gathering content, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on social medias. Links are above me and in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.